to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today we're happy to welcome to our program Dr. Rodney Frye. He holds a PhD in the field of anthropology. As a matter of fact, he has a BA and an MA from Colorado State University. The BA received in 1972, the master's in 1974, and he holds a PhD in the field of anthropology from the University of Colorado, received in 1979. Among his other accomplishments, he is an author. His most well-known work is a book that we have with us today entitled The World of the Crow Indians. We have invited him on the program to deal with this particular publication. His present position is Director of the North Idaho programs for Lewis Clark State College, located his offices in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. In addition to the accomplishments I've mentioned, he has also taught at 7 universities and colleges in such states as Colorado, Montana, and Idaho. We're very happy to have him with us today, and Dr. Frye, welcome to the program. We look forward to discussing your very important work on a very special group of people, the Crow Indians.
Thank you, Tony.
And I'm happy to welcome to the panel someone who's been with me many times before, who is in the Department of Anthropology at North Idaho College, Richard Snyder, who will join in the questioning of our guest today. And I will invite Richard Snyder to commence the questioning now.
Thank you, Tony. Dr. Frye, in your book and in lectures of yours that I've heard, you have spent considerable time referring to worldview, the worldview of the Crow Indians, the worldview of the Eskimos. What's worldview, and why should we even be interested in it?
Well, when I began my association with the Crows, 1974 was the year, one of the very first lessons that was taught me was that one had to go inside. One had to appreciate the world as the Crows see it in order to truly understand it. I was sitting with an old gentleman, and I was asking him some questions. I was very naive at the time, and this question, that question were being asked, and he stopped me, and he pointed out this tin shed, and he said, you know, my culture's kind of like that tin shed. You can stand back here and kind of describe it, but it's not until you get inside it, until you feel it, that you really know what it's about. My culture's the same way. You've got to get inside. See it from the inside out. Every culture, Crows, Eskimo, have their unique ways of seeing the world, and to truly appreciate these peoples, to see their world. Worldview is an attempt at trying to define their perceptions of reality, as opposed simply to imposing the Western point of view on them.
It almost sounds religious.
Well, I'm not sure that. A lot of what you are looking at are religious values of these peoples, the Crow, traditional peoples, Eskimos, Australian Aborigines. You're trying to get down to the basic core of their understanding of themselves in relationship to the larger world. And often that is inundated with religious values, yes.
Dr. Frye, I'd like to go back and have you identify in the Pacific Northwest, because this program does air throughout the Northwest and even into parts of Canada, a little bit about a lead up to the particular tribe, the Crow tribe. Could you identify for our viewers approximately the number of tribes that are located in the Northwest, and just give us a little overview of that and their differences and also their common experiences historically?
Well, that's a very large question, Tony. And my particular background isn't as well versed in the Northwest as it is the Plains area, of which the Crow are a good example of the Plains Indian culture. But there is a tremendous linguistic and historical differentiation of peoples in the Northwest, the Plateau region as well as the Plains. There was a lot of interaction amongst those peoples, trade, cultural diffusion, but a lot of uniquenesses too. Different modes of economics, religious expressions. But as a whole, a fundamental understanding of themselves and the world around them that they did share. They saw the world very much alive, inundated with spiritual beings that they could converse with. A world that was, for them, a home and not something alien or distant. And they all, of course, had the common experience of dealing with European peoples and the often ensuing difficulty dealing with the European peoples. And we all are well aware of some of that history. but there's a tremendous diversity of peoples. I remember once, and this was kind of an awkward situation, but I was teaching for Montana State University on an Indian reservation, on Indian religion, which was kind of a unique experience of a white person, a honky, to use their expression, teaching Indians about Indian religion. But we didn't touch upon the religion of that people, but other Indian peoples, and they were fascinated. They were very fascinated about the diversity and differences.
We all have conversations that are planned on our minds, and we remember them. We had a person to lecture to our campus some years ago from a Northwest tribe, not the Crow tribe, and I had lunch with her following the lecture, a very wonderful, eloquent speaker, and she indicated some of the characteristics of her particular tribe, and she indicated that the difference in cultures, of course, from one group of people to another one. And in relation to that, she made the comment that that often the white man came in and attempted to not only change but destroy the cultures of the various tribes. And the thing that was dearest to her was the religion. And she says, the things that we've told you about, you change and destroy, and we haven't told you our religion, therefore you can't destroy it. Would you comment on that, and how did you find your way through this process to understand the culture and to be able to share that and then to put it in the form of a book? Did you find any problems of being able to get that wonderful opportunity to understand and share another culture?
Yeah. In my experience with the Crows, which involved some 6 years of actual field work from 74 through 80, I found the Crows most open and receptive to an attempt to share their culture more widely. There is a tremendous fear by many of the elders that because of misunderstanding or ignorance on the part of non-Indians, that their culture is simply bulldozed over, run over by the dominant society, and perhaps an attempt at revealing not the most subtle, not the most sacred elements of their religion and culture, but at least a level of the family and the love and the beauty of their society as expressed in the family life and certain ceremonies, without going into detail, that would help. That would help hold back the tide of a dominant society that they fear all the time. You know, keeping in mind that the Crows number no more than 5,000 individuals. They're in a society of 230 million dominant, technologically superior individuals, and they hold tight to their values. There is a fear of losing them, and they feel that educating the non-Indian, is a ticket to that process.
So that has created a situation where they're happy to share through this educational process. So
up to a point.
We have a great appreciation.
Absolutely.
But limits to that.
Right. In the instance of this book, what I did is, once I began writing this book about 2 years ago, I took back the manuscript to the various informants and had them read it, check it out. Is it too intimate? Is it revealing things that shouldn't be revealed? Is it correct? Is it from your perspective? In each instance, the book is a result of that interchange, that dialogue with my informants.
Richard Snyder.
The title of your book, The World of the Crow Indians, is self-explanatory, at least in one sense. But the subtitle, As Driftwood Lodges, would you explain that?
Sure, Richard. As Driftwood Lodges is the central motif of the entire book. It weaves itself through it. The Crows have the expression Ashamal Ech Ia, which translates as Driftwood Lodges. It refers to their clan system, an assemblage of many families. They have an understanding that if you look upon the river, down the river floats driftwood. An individual piece of driftwood has a difficult time of surviving, but on the shore bank there is driftwood surviving, intermingled, woven, lodging together. They took that metaphor, that lesson from the river, and apply it to their lives. Family life, as individuals you can't make it. Together, linked each with the other, you can survive. And that metaphor then is extended throughout all the fibers of much of their society, their religious life, their political life, as well as their family life. And you see that interlinkage and the meaning of what that would be and how people define themselves relative to animals and the land and the little people, you know, the various inhabitants of their cultural world.
So the clan is a driftwood lodge kind of on the river of life, and it relies on itself for survival, but it moves with the current.
Absolutely.
Back and forth rather than fights the current.
Right, right. And that river changes, and the crows have found themselves in changing circumstances, and they still try to weave themselves together as a people in order to survive.
I think Richard Snyder's question shows the contrast between that philosophy and what a lot of people have to live in, what we call the rat race in the fast lane, where individuals are oftentimes separated from even their families, and a great distance, and also a lot of loneliness. One of the great humanists of the world, Mother Teresa, recently when asked what is the greatest problem in the world, and she said it's loneliness. So I gather, and I noted that from your book too, what Richard just talked about, that there's a real strong support system within the Crow culture. Can we elaborate a little bit more by taking what you have just said and comparing it to some of their aspects of their social life and in their political life? How have they taken that philosophy and woven in this very fine support system? What is some of the structure and the policies of the Crow tribe?
Just give a couple of instances that would illustrate that. As you mentioned, there is a major contrast between traditional Crow society and perhaps the dominant Anglo society. And one is this understanding of the individual. Certainly in Indian society, the Crow society, there is the concept defined as an individual. That individual is only relative to a larger fabric of social and spiritual ties. So that, for instance, upon graduating from high school or college, NIC, we would welcome and anticipate gifts being given us for the achievement we have accomplished, for the effort we as an individual asserted through our years of going to college. Gifts would receive, acknowledging then our ability and skill. The Indian, it's just the opposite. Upon graduation, the gifts would be given by that individual, to be sure, an individual, but given out to all of their clan members, their clan uncles and aunts, in reciprocity, in a thank you, in a gesture for what those clan uncles and aunts did, because the individual is seen not having accomplished the associate's degree, their graduation, because of themselves so much, but because of the prayers and because of the support, because of the guidance and the material support of the entire clan. So you acknowledge that the graduation is kind of a subtle, but I think a very revealing example of that extension of the family and the importance of that. Who you are is very much what the family is, not as an individual, but as a group.
And so because of that philosophy, not only in your early years, but throughout your life, you keep that very close tie to your family and the entire tribe.
Absolutely, yes.
Can you give us another example of how that impacts upon your life and in your decision to what you wish to do throughout your life and your work hours, and how that ties to also the social interests that you have? I take
it's difficult to, I mean, one of the assumptions then is it's difficult to leave the reservation.
Yes, that's what
because that network, that support network of relationships, of reciprocity, becomes strained. It still can be maintained, and we find Crows going to college 300, 400 miles away from home, but often returning to apply the skills and knowledge they had acquired back to the reservation. But to maintain the traditional identity, a sense of who they are as a Crow Indian, it's very difficult in a modern society to do that when you sever those ties of family.
But isn't it built within that cultural understanding and trait, even the survival of the tribe, as you talked about a minute ago, being such a small number in the total population of the country, that is its strength. That's the way the tribe
Absolutely,
survives.
absolutely. When you think about it, 5,000 individuals, and perhaps numbering up to 10,000 at one time during the last parts of the century, but they went through the smallpox epidemics as other tribes did. They had the experience of the missionary, they had the experience of government agents, they lost the buffalo, their way of life, and today they face prejudice, they face alcoholism, they face all sorts of unemployment today. The obstacles in that river are still very formidable today, but still they cling together, they survive. And it's not simply a reaction to that, but there's an element of optimism, of hope. The Crows are very, very optimistic about their future. They have a very vivid image of who they are as a people. They speak their language, their clan structure is still very much alive, their religion is still very much alive. They have a sense, an idea of themselves. As N. Scott Momaday a Kiowa poet and Pulitzer Prize winning author once wrote, we are what we imagine ourselves to be. We are what we imagine ourselves to be. And the Crows, you see, have an image of themselves that has allowed them to transcend the material situation they find themselves in, the adversity, all the hardships, which are there and they have to deal with. It's not an easy reality to live within. But I think that because of this identity, that optimism, an image of themselves, that has helped them to survive.
Richard Snag.
I'm very interested, pardon me, in how well the Crow survive in Montana. There's a reservation, and on one side are the Northern Cheyenne, who
Yes.
traditionally have not been friends of the Crow. There are Euro-Americans on all of the other sides. And how well do they survive in that environment? I mean, they're there, obviously, but are they hassled by Euro-Americans or by the Northern Cheyenne? Is there prejudice? What's the world like over there?
It's a tough situation to be within. Certainly the Crows experience the hardships of prejudice directed at them when they go into some communities. And they certainly have an adversarial relationship, traditional adversarial relationship with the Northern Cheyenne, who are their neighbors immediately to their east. But on the other hand, I see the strengths, as we've discussed already, their identity, their Crowness, their traditionalism, their language, their customs, of allowing them to walk both in the Crow world and then in the white man's world, of having a strong sense of self-identity and self-esteem as a result of it. And with that strength, able then to take out that loan at the bank in order to hold down that job in that white community, to venture out at least with the knowledge and strength that they are Indian and Crow. And so they can walk both worlds. I find that the greatest success in dealing with the white world are those who have a traditional sense of themselves, interestingly enough.
A new organization has been created in the Pacific Northwest. In fact, it encompasses the states of Wyoming and Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana. The Northwest Coalition Against Malicious Harassment. Since you brought up this issue of prejudice, I think this is a fine new organization, and on its board of directors are members from the major ethnic groups in the Northwest, including the Indian communities, Hispanic, Asian American, Black, and Jewish. And since I'm a part of that and interested in that, I would like to get you, for our viewers, to give us a little more information, since this prejudice has been experienced by the Crow tribe and certainly many others. There's over 40 tribes in those 5 states that I've identified. What is being done? Certainly there's legislation on the books nationally, and the states, such as Montana, have a Human Rights Commission. Are the Crows, as they have faced this prejudice, receive support from any of the government entities or groups to help correct this problem?
Certainly there are agencies at work. What comes to mind relative to your question, Tony, is again simply the internal workings of the Crow people to try to overcome the prejudice they are facing, and not so much relying upon external factors, though they're relying upon government agencies and state agencies at various levels to help overcome these problems. But a lot of it has to do with education, and the Crows have taken a lead among Indians of Montana in trying to educate their own people as well as the non-Indian as to the ways. And they have their own college. They have their Little Bighorn College on the reservation that has tried to uplift an understanding of themselves as a people, to try to overcome and root out the sources of the prejudice, and that being ignorance. They've taken a lead in that themselves. They certainly have a very active vocally in the state in representing themselves, and they're very proud people in that. But I see much of that answer coming simply from the Crows themselves through their education processes.
Inner strength.
Yes.
Has it tied, I assume from what you've been talking about, the Driftwood again,
Yes.
support one another. Can we go into another area that has to do with that? And again, I respect this, how you approach this study of this book. I really admire the fact that you had the sensitivity that you did in your research and sharing with the members of the tribe before publishing. But based upon that and your very good knowledge and understanding of their areas of sensitivity, give us an overall philosophy of how the Crow tribe perceives life in general. I know some friends that I have and that are American Indian or Native Americans, that they have a very, very special understanding and appreciation of nature. Share with us what the Crows believe concerning basic issues of nature and how humans must interact with nature.
Well, as suggested by the metaphor as driftwood lodges, it's not only applied to a network of human beings, but also to the natural world, also to the world of animals. And that linkage, that interdependency, is not simply because of the linkage with human beings, but also with the animals. Traditionally, for example, under the hunt, and the situation of going out hunting, of which the Crows still maintain an important part of their economy because of, there would be a relationship with the animal that would have to be entered into. It's not simply going out and taking the animal, but also respecting the animal, asking for its assistance, asking for its physical body in order to be used by human beings, of making prayers, of directing those prayers, which are seen as gestures of respect toward the animal in order for the animal to enter into relationship with the human being. An interesting example, one of the elders taught me that he saw the world very much like a wagon wheel, which obviously is a very European idea, but a very ancient idea also in the sense of the medicine wheels, the rock medicine wheels which dot the northern plains, the structure of the Sundance Lodge when looked from above, a teepee, a camp circle, the circle transfixed by the various spokes, and then a central hub. He sees the world, and many Crows see it the same way, as if there is a magnitude of separate peoples, but also separate entities, animals, bird life, all of the creatures as separate entities as part of that wheel, all important. To remove some, to disrespect some, to eliminate some of those spokes you see, would no longer allow that wheel to turn. For the wheel to turn, all must be respected for the integrity and uniqueness of them all. All are equal, human beings alongside animals. Various human beings in various religions, again, all equal as separate spokes, but then all linked to a central deity, a central idea of God. Understood perhaps differently, worshipped differently by the animal peoples as opposed to human peoples, or perhaps differently by peoples themselves. The white people, the Indian peoples, the African peoples have their own idea of God, but each spoke then is unique, having their own languages, but linking to a central hub, allowing the wheel to turn. There is a respect for life, and that's expressed, I think, in the driftwood lodges as well as in that wagon wheel.
A model for tolerance.
Yes.
One other point, and then back to Richard, and that would deal with the fact that from this philosophy they would have a great caution, I would assume, in use of resources, that they would only take what they need, that it certainly runs contrary to greed. Their philosophy would oppose greed.
That's correct. Certainly, it's not a profit motive that underlies their approach to nature, but they also see nature as offering gifts to them, and the Crows have a tremendous coal reserve, and they're digging the coal, they're exploiting the coal in a sense. The coal was given to them. The coal, then, the benefits of it, the monies, the revenues will generate education, go into the schools, will help housing, medical benefits for the people themselves. They're certainly not averse to progress as we would define it, and they would use it, but seeing it in this sort of spiritual relationship as well.
Richard Snyder.
I'm curious, has the evil of termination reared its head over among the Crow recently?
Not so much termination of their reservation status, but there's always a fear that they would be losing certain rights. Whether it's founded on fact or not, I don't know, but there is that fear that perhaps the government will come in and remove the eagle feathers from use in a ritual context, or they'll come in and stop the use of this practice or that practice, because they've had a history, long history, of that event, precisely that event, happening over and over again. The laws being enacted, prohibiting social dances, sun dances, and then they're being lifted and then imposed again. So there's always that constant fear, and they're on a vigil. They're always on this.
But wouldn't also termination somehow require that the driftwood lodges be torn down? I mean, this is, I don't literally mean you're taking something apart, but in that sense, and people would have to go out as individuals rather than members of these large support groups. Because you couldn't really live as driftwood lodges unless there was a reservation situation.
Well, I don't know. I don't know, Richard.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly that metaphor of as driftwood lodges existed prior to reservations being established. It's very ancient.
But not with our Euro-American world and private property and fences. And you know, if the reservation was destroyed and broken up into little allotted parcels, I'm not sure that traditional way could survive.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how. I don't have a good answer. My inclination is that it, in fact, would. I mean, today they live with land being parceled out. It's not held in common. They are scattered over the reservation, housing. They have material conditions that are very harsh and would seem to undermine the strength that I would see of that driftwood lodges. But on the other hand, despite that, even if those physical circumstances changed, even if the reservation structure had been removed, I think the Crows would still persist as a Crow people.
I like your confidence.
Yeah.
I hope that's true.
Anthropologists have stated the Crows would be gone next year, next 10 years, and they've been saying that for 150 years, but the Crows are still here.
A minute ago, in indicating your research that you did for the book, The World of the Crow Indians, you indicated that there was some more caution of from the elders of the tribe than younger members of the tribe in relation to, I understand, providing the teachings that you were seeking. Can you elaborate a little bit more on, did you get more information from younger members of the tribe than you did the elders?
No, not necessarily. I think that my closest informants, really friends, were elders and were willing to share and open up their lives to myself. I must admit that my intent when I started working with the Crow was never to write a book. I was hired by the Crows to do a project for them one summer, the Catholics another. I taught on the reservation for a couple of years. One thing led to another. And then I realized that there's a lot of very important lessons that should be shared more widely. And so then I talked with several individuals and asked them, is this a good idea? Should we put this together as a book? And got a very positive response on each occasion. And so then I went back just a few years ago to write the book and then to share it more widely. It's a teaching tool, and it's an extension of what the elders are teaching now, the young people. It's dedicated to the elders, as a matter of fact.
There must be a lot of pride in the book by the tribe itself.
Absolutely.
I wish we could continue this conversation, but time has expired, and I would like, on behalf of Richard Snyder, to thank you, and anyone who wishes to have this book, you could write to us, and we'll get you in touch with where you can get the book. Of course, it's at the bookstores, entitled The World of the Crow Indians. Hope you've enjoyed our program, and that you'll be with us again next week at the same time. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.